Mother Bear adopted this paralyzed human baby. What happened next? Put everyone in tears. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Every bit of your support helps us create even more amazing stories for you. The morning sun struggled to break through the thick forest canopy as Olivia Bennet clutched her tiny son closer to her chest. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the light rain that had begun to fall. Her heart felt like it was being torn from her body with each step she took deeper into the wilderness. Little Noah, only 6 months old, lay motionless in her arms, his eyes wide and curious despite his fragile condition. "I'm so sorry, my sweet boy," Olivia whispered, her voice breaking. "I can't give you the care you need. The doctors said you'll never walk, never crawl, that your paralysis will only get worse." She kissed his forehead, her tears falling onto his soft cheeks. "And now that your father is gone, I have nothing left to give you." Olivia had been walking for hours, far from the small town where whispers followed her everywhere. Whispers about the woman whose husband died in a logging accident, and whose baby was born with a rare condition that left him paralyzed from the neck down. The medical bills had piled up. The looks of pity had become unbearable. The crushing weight of caring for a special needs child alone had finally broken her. She found a hollow beneath a massive oak tree, sheltered from the rain. With trembling hands, she wrapped Noah tighter in his blue blanket, the one her mother had knitted before she too had passed away. She placed a small bottle of milk beside him, knowing it wouldn't last long. It was a futile gesture of care from a mother who had convinced herself that a quick death in nature was better than the slow suffering she believed awaited her son. "Someone will find you. Someone stronger than me," she lied to herself, as much as to him, "or the angels will take you quickly." With one last kiss on his forehead, Olivia turned and ran, her sobs echoing through the trees until they faded into the sounds of the forest. Little Noah didn't cry. His big blue eyes stared up at the patches of sky visible through the leaves. He couldn't move his tiny arms or legs to reach for his mother as she disappeared. He could only lie there, vulnerable and alone, as the forest creatures began to stir with curiosity at this strange new addition to their world. Not far away, a massive brown bear emerged from her den. Her name was known among the local hunters as Willow, recognizable by the distinctive white patch of fur on her chest. She had given birth to twin cubs just 3 months ago, and now she moved cautiously through her territory, her sharp senses alert for any dangers that might threaten her young ones who tumbled along behind her. The scent hit Willow's sensitive nose, an unusual smell that didn't belong in her forest. Human, but different somehow, smaller, weaker. Milk, fear, abandonment. The bear's instincts pulled her in 2 directions: avoid the human scent, protect her cubs from potential danger, or investigate this strange, vulnerable presence that somehow called to the mother in her. Her cubs played nearby, unaware of their mother's inner conflict as Willow cautiously approached the hollow where Noah lay. The baby's blanket had come partially unwrapped in the light breeze, exposing his tiny face to the wilderness. A small woodland creature had already approached, sniffing curiously at the bottle of milk. Willow's massive frame cast a shadow over the infant. Her hot breath steamed in the cool air as she lowered her snout toward the baby, sniffing carefully. Noah's eyes widened at the sight of the enormous creature, but still, he didn't cry. Perhaps he was too weak, or perhaps some ancient instinct told him that silence was his only hope. The bear's dark eyes met the baby's blue ones. Something passed between them, something primitive and profound. Recognition, perhaps. Not of species, but of souls. The baby made a small sound, not of fear, but of acknowledgement, as if greeting a friend he had been waiting for. Willow's cubs approached cautiously, curious about this strange, hairless creature that smelled of milk and human. They sniffed at Noah's blanket, their wet noses tickling his cheeks. And then, in a moment that defied every natural law, Willow did something extraordinary. She nudged her cubs aside gently, and, with the same careful precision she used with her own young, she took the edge of Noah's blanket between her teeth and began to drag him, slowly, gently, toward her den. The forest fell silent, as if holding its breath. The woodland creatures watched in amazement as a mother bear adopted a human child, pulling him to safety as the rain began to fall more heavily, washing away any trace of Olivia's footprints and the desperate choice she had made. Inside the warm den, Willow's cubs circled Noah curiously, their soft fur brushing against his face. The paralyzed baby, who had never felt the sensation of movement in his own limbs, felt the vibration of the earth beneath him as Willow settled her massive body protectively around him and her cubs. For the first time since his birth, Noah felt something new. Not the sterile touch of doctors or the tearful embrace of his broken mother, but the strong, unconditional protection of a creature who asked nothing of him, who didn't see his paralysis as a burden, who simply recognized another soul in need. As night fell over the forest, Noah slept peacefully surrounded by bear cubs, while, somewhere miles away, his mother wept for the child she believed would soon be with the angels. Neither of them could have imagined how wrong she was, or how right she might ultimately be, in ways she never intended. The morning light filtered through the den entrance, casting a golden glow over Noah's face. He had survived his first night in the wilderness, but a new challenge emerged: hunger. His bottle of milk lay empty outside the den, forgotten in Willow's hasty rescue. The bear sensed the baby's discomfort as he began to whimper softly, his tiny face scrunching up in hunger. Willow's maternal instincts, already awakened by this strange, hairless cub, pushed her toward an impossible solution. She nudged one of her own cubs aside and, with extreme gentleness, guided Noah's face toward her. Nature had prepared her body to nourish young, and in a miracle that defied explanation, the human baby latched on and fed. Dr. Marcus Reed stood at the edge of the forest, his binoculars trained on a family of deer grazing in the distance. As the town's wildlife biologist, he spent most of his days tracking and documenting the animals that inhabited these woods. 55 years old, with salt and pepper hair and weathered skin that told stories of decades spent outdoors, Marcus had seen many wonders in nature, but nothing had prepared him for what he was about to discover. His radio crackled to life. "Dr. Reed, we've got reports of unusual bear activity near the eastern creek. Hunter says Willow's acting strange, carrying something that doesn't look like a cub." Marcus frowned. He'd been monitoring Willow for years, and had a special fondness for the bear with the white chest patch. "I'll check it out. Tell everyone to stay clear until I give the all clear." Back in town, the small community of Pinewood was buzzing with the news of Olivia Bennett's disappearance. Sheriff Grace Chen stood in Olivia's small apartment, taking in the scene. Baby bottles lined up on the counter, a crib with a mobile of stars and moons, a stack of medical bills with red "Final Notice" stamps, and a handwritten note that simply read, "I'm sorry. I couldn't bear his suffering or mine any longer." "Any sign of the baby?" Deputy Tom Miller asked, his young face grave with concern. Sheriff Chen shook her head, her short black hair catching the light as she turned. "No, and that's what worries me most. Olivia's car is still here. Wherever she went, she took Noah on foot." "In his condition?" Tom's voice cracked. Everyone in town knew about baby Noah's diagnosis. He wouldn't survive outdoors for long. Grace's dark eyes narrowed as she picked up a map from Olivia's table. A hiking map of the forest, with a route circled in red pen. Call search and rescue. And get Dr. Reed on the radio. If they went into the woods, we need to find them before nightfall. Willow's unusual behavior continued over the days that followed. She became fiercely protective of the strange human cub, carrying him gently by his blanket whenever the family moved locations. When her cubs pawed at him too roughly, she would nudge them away with a gentle but firm push. Most remarkably, she began bringing soft foods to the den, berries crushed between her teeth into a pulp, honeycomb dripping with sweetness, even soft fish meat from the creek, carefully deboned by her powerful jaws. Noah's blue eyes grew brighter with each passing day, though his limbs remained motionless from his paralysis. His other senses seemed to sharpen in the wild environment. He recognized the specific sound of Willow's footfalls, cooing happily when she returned to the den. His skin, once pale from life indoors, began to take on a healthy glow from brief, filtered sunlight exposure as Willow occasionally moved him to sunny patches outside the den. The bear cubs, whom Noah came to know as his siblings, would nuzzle against him, their warm fur providing comfort and heat. The smaller female cub, with a patch of brown fur above her eye that looked like an eyebrow, seemed especially attached to Noah, often curling up beside him for naps. The larger male cub initially showed jealousy, pawing at Noah until Willow intervened, but gradually accepted this strange new addition to their family. One extraordinary evening, as a summer storm raged outside, lightning struck a tree near the den. The resounding crack and vibration terrified the cubs, who scrambled deeper into the den. Noah, unable to move himself, lay exposed as rain began to blow in through the entrance. Willow was out foraging, too far to hear any cries for help. The larger male cub, acting on some newly formed bond, cautiously approached Noah. Using his snout and paws, he awkwardly but deliberately pushed the human baby deeper into the den, to safety beside his trembling sister. When Willow returned, she found her cubs and her adopted human child huddled together, the bear cub having performed his first act of protection. Dr. Marcus Reed found the first clue 3 days into the search, a baby bottle, its plastic scratched but intact, lying near the base of an oak tree. He radioed Sheriff Chen immediately. "I've got something at the coordinates I'm sending now. Bring the team." Within an hour, the search party had expanded their radius from the bottle. Deputy Tom was the one who found the second clue, a scrap of blue blanket caught on a thorn bush. The fabric matched the description of Noah's favorite blanket, the one Olivia's mother had made. "The trail leads north," Marcus observed, examining broken twigs and disturbed undergrowth. "But that's deep into Willow's territory." He didn't voice his deeper concern. If the baby had been left in these woods, predators would have found him long before the search party did. Sheriff Chen's face hardened. "We keep looking until we find something conclusive." She didn't say a body, but everyone heard the unspoken fear. What they didn't realize was that they were being watched. From a ridge above, Willow observed the humans invading her territory. The mother bear sensed their purpose somehow, recognized their scent as similar to her adopted cubs. She retreated silently to her new den. She'd moved her family twice since finding Noah, instinctively putting distance between her cubs and potential threats. That night, as the search party set up camp, Dr. Reed sat alone by the fire, studying his wildlife journals. His entries on Willow detailed years of observing her behavior, her pregnancies, her interactions with other bears. Nothing suggested she would behave the way the hunter had described, carrying something that wasn't a cub. Unless... His thoughts were interrupted by Sheriff Chen, who sat down heavily beside him. Marcus, it's been almost a week. Even if Olivia is still out there somewhere, the baby... I know. Marcus stared into the flames. But there's something else happening here. I've been tracking these woods for 20 years, Grace. Animals don't behave the way they're supposed to sometimes. They surprise us. Grace sighed, pulling her jacket tighter around her shoulders. You're talking about miracles, Marcus. I need to prepare the town for the likelihood that we're looking for remains. Back in the new den, a small cave tucked behind a waterfall, Noah experienced another first. As Willow groomed her cubs, licking their fur clean, she turned to Noah and began to gently lick his face and hands. The sensation triggered something in the baby's nervous system, a tingling that started at his neck and traveled downward. For the first time in his life, Noah's fingers twitched. It was such a small movement that even Willow didn't notice it. But Noah felt it. The first voluntary muscle response he had ever experienced. His brain had formed a new pathway, stimulated by the unconventional therapy of a bear's rough tongue and the constant tactile input from the cubs who rolled against him, dragged him, and played around him. That night, while the search party slept a mile away and his mother sat in a police station answering difficult questions, for Olivia had emerged from the woods disheveled and disoriented, confessing to her desperate act. Noah's fingers curled fully for the first time, grasping a tuft of the female cub's fur as she slept beside him. The search for baby Noah intensified after Olivia's confession. The entire town of Pinewood joined the effort, forming lines to comb through the dense forest. Dr. Reed and Sheriff Chen led different teams, covering ground methodically, but with increasing urgency. Hope faded with each passing hour. No infant, especially one with Noah's condition, could survive this long in the wilderness. Olivia, hollow-eyed and trembling, sat in a hospital room under suicide watch. "The angels have him now," she repeated whenever anyone questioned her. "It's better this way. He's not suffering anymore." But Noah was very much alive, and he was changing. The constant movement of being carried by Willow, the different positions she placed him in, the way the cubs tumbled over and around him. All of it was providing a form of physical therapy no human doctor had ever prescribed. His muscles, though affected by his condition, weren't allowed to atrophy. The rich nutrients from Willow's milk and the wild foods she carefully prepared for him strengthened his immune system in ways modern medicine couldn't replicate. 2 weeks after his abandonment, Noah did something that even the most optimistic specialist would have deemed impossible. He raised his arm above his head, reaching for a butterfly that had fluttered into the den. Willow observed this new movement with curious eyes. She approached Noah, sniffing his raised arm, then gently took his blanket in her teeth and carried him outside into a patch of wildflowers buzzing with insects. She placed him on his stomach, a position that would have been deemed dangerous by his doctors, and watched as he struggled, his determination evident in his furrowed brow. With tremendous effort, Noah managed to push himself up slightly on his arms, raising his head to follow the movements of a bumblebee. The bear cubs, excited by this new game, mimicked him, flopping onto their stomachs nearby. For hours, they stayed this way, the human baby and bear cubs practicing what looked remarkably like physical therapy exercises. Dr. Marcus Reed was losing hope when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong in the forest. Not a cry exactly, but a human sound nonetheless, a baby's laugh. He froze, signaling to his team to be silent. The sound came again, carried on the breeze from the direction of the waterfall. Marcus slowly raised his binoculars, adjusting the focus as he scanned the area. What he saw nearly caused him to drop the expensive equipment. Through the lenses, he observed the impossible. A massive brown bear with a distinctive white chest patch lying in a clearing of wildflowers. Beside her, 2 bear cubs played in the sunshine, and between them, partially wrapped in what was once a blue blanket, was a human baby, very much alive, lifting his head and arms as he watched the cubs tumble nearby. "Grace," Marcus whispered into his radio, his voice shaking. "I found him, but you're not going to believe who's taking care of him." The rescue operation that followed required every bit of Marcus's wildlife expertise. Tranquilizing Willow was deemed too dangerous. She might fall on the cubs or the baby, or the other cubs might become aggressive when their mother collapsed. Instead, they attempted a distraction technique, with one team creating noise to draw Willow's attention, while another team approached from downwind to retrieve Noah. But nature had other plans. As the rescue team crept closer, the wind shifted, carrying their scent directly to Willow. The bear rose to her full height, 7 feet of protective maternal fury, and roared a warning that shook the forest canopy. She gathered her cubs with one sweep of her paw and snatched Noah's blanket in her teeth, preparing to flee with her family. In that crucial moment, Dr. Reed made a decision that contradicted every safety protocol. He stepped into the clearing alone, his hands empty and visible. "Willow," he called softly, using the name he'd given her years ago. "We're not here to harm him. Or you." The bear paused, her dark eyes fixed on the familiar human. She had encountered Marcus many times over the years, had grown accustomed to his scent and his quiet presence observing from a distance. He had never threatened her or her cubs. "That's a human child," Marcus continued, taking a slow step forward. "He needs human care now. You've done something amazing, old girl. You've saved him when we couldn't. But it's time to let him go home." Willow didn't understand his words, of course, but something in his tone, his scent, his body language spoke to her. She lowered herself slightly, still clutching Noah's blanket gently between her teeth. Marcus took another step, then another. The rescue team watched in breathless silence as the wildlife biologist approached the massive bear with nothing but soft words as protection. When he was within 10 feet, Marcus slowly knelt and extended his hand. "The baby, Willow, please." To the astonishment of everyone watching, the bear hesitated, then slowly placed Noah's blanket on the ground. She nudged the baby forward with her snout, not toward Marcus, but into the space between them, relinquishing him, but not fully surrendering him either. Marcus inched forward on his knees until he could reach the baby. Noah's bright blue eyes blinked up at him, unafraid, and then something happened that made the hardened wildlife biologist's eyes fill with tears. Noah raised his arm and waved it, a clear, voluntary movement that should have been impossible given his diagnosis. As Marcus carefully lifted Noah, cradling him against his chest, Willow made a soft huffing sound. Her cubs peeked from behind her massive form, the smaller female cub whimpering slightly. Noah turned his head toward the sound, his tiny hand reaching out toward his bear family. "I promise he'll be safe," Marcus whispered to Willow, "and I'll make sure he knows what you did for him." With that, he backed away slowly, the precious bundle secure in his arms. Willow watched them go, her massive form silhouetted against the setting sun, a creature who had defied her nature to nurture a child who wasn't her own. At the hospital, the medical staff was astounded by Noah's condition. Not only had he survived weeks in the wilderness, but he showed dramatic improvement in his mobility. MRI scans revealed increased neural activity, forming new pathways around the damaged sections of his spine. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Sarah Winters said, reviewing the results with Sheriff Chen and Dr. Reed. The constant stimulation, the movement, the diverse tactile input from the bear's fur and tongue, it essentially rewired his brain to find new ways to control his muscles. And the nutritional components of the bear's milk, combined with the wild diet, it's like the perfect experimental therapy no ethics board would ever approve. Noah lay in a hospital crib, surrounded by monitoring equipment but smiling and moving his arms with increasing coordination. His mother, Olivia, stood at the window looking in, tears streaming down her face. She wasn't allowed direct contact yet. Her abandonment had triggered a child services investigation, but the sight of her son moving limbs that doctors had pronounced permanently paralyzed left her speechless. "Will he fully recover?" Sheriff Chen asked, watching the baby through the glass. Dr. Winters shook her head. "It's too early to tell, but he's already exceeded every expectation. We're seeing movement that should be impossible based on his original diagnosis. Whether that translates to walking someday?" She shrugged. "I wouldn't bet against this child. He survived being raised by bears. Normal medical limitations don't seem to apply." Marcus stood quietly, thinking about Willow and her cubs, wondering how they were adjusting to Noah's absence. "Nature finds a way," he murmured. "Sometimes the wild knows better than we do." 6 months later, Dr. Marcus Reed hiked through the autumn forest, a small backpack containing special equipment, not his usual research gear but a baby carrier. Beside him walked Olivia Bennett, her face now filled with color and hope instead of despair. After intensive therapy, parenting classes, and psychiatric treatment, she had regained custody of Noah, with close monitoring from child services, and cradled against her chest, alert and babbling happily, was Noah himself. Now, 14 months old, he could sit up unassisted, grasp objects with both hands, and even push himself across the floor in a modified crawl. His legs still showed weakness, but his physical therapists were amazed by his progress. "Are you sure this is safe?" Olivia asked nervously as they approached the coordinates Marcus had marked. "What if she doesn't remember him?" Marcus smiled. "Bears have excellent memories, especially when it comes to their young, and I've been monitoring her. She still returns to this clearing every few days, as if she's looking for him." They reached the edge of a small meadow just as the afternoon sun broke through the clouds. Marcus signaled for Olivia to stop and stay hidden among the trees. "Let me go first with Noah. She knows me." With practiced hands, he transferred Noah to the special carrier on his chest. The baby immediately began looking around eagerly, as if he somehow remembered these woods, these smells. Marcus stepped into the clearing and waited. 10 minutes passed in silence, then 20. Noah remained surprisingly patient, his blue eyes scanning the tree line. Then came a rustling from the far side of the meadow. A large form emerged from the shadows. Willow, her coat thicker as winter approached, her white chest patch visible even at a distance. Behind her, 2 adolescent cubs followed, nearly grown but still staying close to their mother. "Willow," Marcus called softly. "We brought someone to see you." The bear froze, her nose lifting to catch their scent on the breeze. Recognition dawned in her dark eyes. She took a cautious step forward, then another. Noah saw her and let out a delighted squeal, his arms and legs kicking with excitement. At the sound, Willow's pace quickened until she was just 15 feet away, close enough that Marcus could see the intelligence in her gaze as she recognized the human cub she had saved. The female cub, now much larger but still recognizable by the eyebrow-like marking, peeked around her mother curiously. Noah pointed directly at her and made a babbling sound that sounded remarkably like an attempt at communication. "He remembers," Marcus whispered in awe. He actually remembers them. From the tree line, Olivia watched with tears streaming down her face as her son interacted with the most unlikely family reunion in history. She saw how Noah reached toward the bears without fear, how his eyes lit up with joy, how his legs kicked with more strength than she'd ever seen him use before. The most extraordinary moment came when Noah, inspired by the sight of his bear siblings, suddenly pushed himself forward in Marcus's arms with such force that the biologist had to tighten his grip. The baby was trying to go to them, to rejoin the family that had given him a second chance at life. "That's your other family, little one," Marcus told him softly. "They loved you when you needed it most. And they taught you to fight, to move, to survive." Willow watched for several more minutes, her cubs occasionally standing on hind legs to get a better look at the human cub they remembered. Then, with a soft huffing sound that seemed almost like goodbye, she turned and led her cubs back into the forest. At the edge of the trees, she paused for one last look before disappearing into the shadows. Olivia stepped forward to join Marcus and Noah in the clearing. "I'll never be able to thank her," she said, her voice breaking. "She did what I couldn't. She gave my son a chance when I'd given up hope." Marcus placed Noah in his mother's arms. "That's the thing about nature, Olivia. It finds paths we can't see. Willow didn't know Noah was supposed to be paralyzed for life. She just treated him like one of her cubs, always moving, always stimulated, always challenged." Noah reached up to touch his mother's tear-streaked face, his movements more coordinated with each passing day. From now on, his therapy would include regular visits to the forest edge, where the boundary between the human world and the wild was thinner than anyone had imagined. And somewhere in the heart of the woods, a mother bear continued to patrol her territory, occasionally pausing at empty dens where the scent of a human cub still lingered faintly. She had done something no one could have predicted. She had bridged the divide between species, between civilized and wild, between hopeless and healing. The story of Noah Bennett and the bear called Willow spread far beyond the town of Pinewood. Medical researchers came to study the boy who defied his diagnosis. Wildlife experts interviewed Dr. Reed about the unprecedented behavior of the mother bear. News crews tried to capture footage of Willow, though Marcus carefully guarded her location to protect her from becoming a spectacle. But for those closest to the miracle, the most profound change was in how they viewed the world around them. Sheriff Chen established the county's first wildlife conservation officer position. Olivia trained to become a physical therapist, developing nature-based treatments inspired by her son's experience. And Dr. Marcus Reed published a revolutionary paper on animal cognition and cross-species empathy. As for Noah, on his second birthday, he took his first independent steps while holding on to his mother's hands. The doctors who had once told Olivia her son would never move his legs stood watching in tearful amazement. And if someone had been looking very carefully at the edge of the forest beyond the Bennett's backyard that day, they might have glimpsed a large brown bear with a white chest patch, silently witnessing the miracle she had helped create. Nature, it seemed, had wisdom that science was only beginning to understand. And sometimes, the most profound healing comes not from sterile hospitals and cutting-edge treatments, but from the ancient, instinctive bond between living creatures who recognize in each other a kindred spirit in need. 3 years passed. Noah grew into a bright, curious 5-year-old whose medical file had become legendary among neurologists across the country. Although he still used leg braces and occasionally needed a wheelchair for long distances, he could walk independently for short periods, an outcome that defied every prognosis from his birth. His arms showed almost normal strength and coordination, allowing him to draw, build with blocks, and even climb with assistance. But beyond his physical improvements, Noah displayed something even more remarkable: an uncanny connection with animals, particularly large predators that typically avoided human contact. During a class trip to the Pinewood Wildlife Sanctuary, Noah had wandered away from the group and was found sitting calmly beside the wolf enclosure. The normally skittish pack gathered at the fence nearest to him. The wolves weren't aggressive. They were attentive, almost protective, as if they recognized something in the small boy that other humans couldn't perceive. "He smells different," Dr. Marcus Reed explained to a concerned Olivia after the incident. "Not just to us, but to them. Noah spent his formative months being groomed by a bear, eating wild foods, developing in an environment totally foreign to most humans. His microbiome, his pheromones, they're unique." "Is that dangerous?" Olivia asked, watching her son sleeping peacefully in his bed adorned with stuffed bears. The largest one, with a hand-sewn white patch on its chest, held a special place of honor. Marcus shook his head. "I don't think so. If anything, it seems to be protective. But I've been meaning to talk to you about something else." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "The university's research team wants to conduct a more comprehensive study of Noah's condition and his connection to Willow." Olivia's expression hardened. "He's not a lab rat, Marcus." "Of course not," Marcus hurried to clarify. "But what happened between Noah and Willow could potentially help other children with similar conditions. The forest therapy program we've been developing based on Noah's experience is already showing promising results with other paralysis patients." The program Marcus referred to was the brainchild of Olivia herself. After completing her training as a physical therapist, she had created a revolutionary approach combining traditional therapy with carefully structured exposure to natural environments. Patients spent time on specially designed forest floors where the varied textures stimulated nerve endings, in shallow streams where water resistance provided gentle muscle conditioning, even in modified tree houses where climbing strengthened weakened limbs. But the crown jewel of the program, the element that drew skeptics and believers alike, was the animal interaction component, developed under Marcus's careful supervision. Therapy dogs were common in rehabilitation, but Olivia's program carefully introduced patients to larger, gentler livestock, and eventually to more wild species under controlled conditions. The theory, supported by Noah's miraculous case, was that varied animal movements and behaviors stimulated patients' mirror neurons in ways traditional therapy couldn't replicate. "What exactly does the university want?" Olivia asked, her protective instincts still evident in her tense posture. Marcus sat on the edge of Noah's bed, gazing at the sleeping child whose existence had redefined his understanding of both human resilience and animal cognition. "They want to take Noah back to the forest, to observe if his connection with Willow persists after all this time. They're calling it the imprint study." Olivia's breath caught. "Is Willow even still alive? It's been years, Marcus." "She is," Marcus confirmed, his eyes lighting up with the enthusiasm that made him such a respected researcher. "My trail cameras caught footage of her just last month. She's older now, of course. Her cubs have left to establish their own territories. But she's still there, still strong." He pulled out his tablet and showed Olivia the image, the distinctive bear with the white chest patch, her muzzle now graying slightly, standing majestically beside the same waterfall where she had once sheltered Noah. "And you think she would remember him?" Olivia's voice wavered between skepticism and wonder. "Bears can remember food sources and territory boundaries for their entire lives," Marcus explained, "and the bond she formed with Noah was far deeper than ordinary memory. I believe there's a connection there that time hasn't erased." Noah stirred in his sleep, his small hand reaching out unconsciously to grasp the stuffed bear beside him. Since infancy, he had displayed this habit, reaching, always reaching, as if searching for something just beyond his grasp. Olivia watched her son with the tears forming in her eyes. He dreams about them, you know. He tells me stories about his bear mama and his bear sister and brother. I always thought they were just dreams, or stories we told him that he incorporated into his imagination. Or memories, Marcus suggested softly. The brain forms neural pathways from the earliest moments of life. Noah's most essential developmental period was spent with Willow. Those imprints don't just disappear. The decision wasn't made that night, or even that month. Olivia consulted with Noah's doctors, his therapists, and even a child psychologist who specialized in unusual trauma cases. The consensus surprised her. Most believed that reconnecting Noah with the environment and beings that had been instrumental in his early development might provide closure, context, and potentially even further healing. When the day finally came, a small team assembled at the forest edge. Marcus, Olivia, Noah, Dr. Sarah Winters, who had overseen Noah's medical care since his rescue, and 2 graduate students with specialized equipment to monitor Noah's neurological and physiological responses during the encounter. University ethics boards and wildlife conservation authorities had established strict protocols to ensure both Noah's safety and minimal disturbance to Willow's natural behavior. Noah sat in his specialized outdoor wheelchair, his excitement palpable as Marcus explained the plan. "We'll go to the observation blind first, the little wooden house where we can watch without being seen. If Willow comes to the clearing, we'll assess the situation. Only if all safety conditions are met will we consider a closer interaction." Noah nodded solemnly, his blue eyes wide with anticipation. At 5, he was old enough to understand the significance of what they were doing, yet young enough to accept the extraordinary circumstances of his life without question. To him, having been raised by a bear was simply part of his story, as natural as another child might view having been born in another country. "Will she remember me?" he asked, his small voice carrying across the forest edge. "Will she know I'm her baby?" The adults exchanged glances, careful not to promise what they couldn't guarantee. "Bears have excellent memories," Marcus said gently, "but she might be cautious at first. It's been a long time." The journey to the observation blind took longer than anticipated. Noah's wheelchair, though designed for outdoor terrain, struggled with some of the narrower paths. Olivia found herself remembering, with painful clarity, how she had walked these same woods years ago, a broken woman carrying her infant son to what she had believed would be his grave. Now she returned stronger, wiser, pushing that same son, not to abandon him, but to reconnect him with the unlikely savior who had given him a second chance at life. Inside the blind, the team set up their equipment quietly. Through the viewing slats, they could see the clearing where Marcus had been leaving food occasional for Willow, not enough to make her dependent, but sufficient to encourage her to visit this specific location. Noah sat perfectly still, his hands resting on the specialized sensors that would measure his galvanic skin response, pulse, and subtle muscle activations. An hour passed. Then 2. The graduate students whispered concerns about the failing light. Dr. Winters monitored Noah's fatigue levels, knowing his condition made him tire more easily than other children his age, but Noah showed no signs of wanting to leave, his eyes fixed on the clearing with unwavering faith. Just as Marcus was about to suggest postponing the encounter, a rustle at the far edge of the clearing silenced everyone. Noah's monitors showed an immediate spike in heart rate and neural activity. "She's coming," he whispered, before any of the adults had seen movement. "I can feel her." Moments later, Willow emerged into the clearing. Age had touched her. Her movements were slightly slower, her magnificent coat now showing silver strands among the brown. but the white chest patch that had given her her name still stood out starkly against her dark fur, like a badge of honor. The bear paused at the center of the clearing, her nose lifted to the air. She turned her head directly toward the blind, though it was designed to minimize human scent. A low, rumbling sound emanated from her throat. Not aggressive, but questioning. Noah's monitors went wild. Without warning, his legs began to move in his wheelchair, pushing against the footrests with more strength than his therapist had ever recorded. His brain activity showed patterns typically seen only in intense emotional recognition scenarios. "Bear, Mama," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the blind's viewing slats. "I came back." What happened next defied explanation by any scientific standard. Willow approached the blind directly, ignoring years of conditioning to avoid human structures. She stopped just outside, her massive head level with the opening where Noah sat, her dark eyes, intelligent and searching, fixed on the small boy. "She recognizes him," Marcus whispered, incredulous despite his hopes. "She actually recognizes him." Dr. Winters stared at the neural readings in astonishment. "Noah's brain is firing in patterns I've never seen before. It's almost as if—" She stopped, unable to put into scientific terms what the monitors were showing. "As if what?" Olivia pressed, her hand protectively on Noah's shoulder. "As if they're communicating," the doctor finished reluctantly. "Not through language, but through something more primitive, more fundamental." Noah reached a hand toward the viewing slat, his fingers trembling, not with fear, but with anticipation. "Can I go outside? Please? She won't hurt me. She wants to see if I can walk now." The adults exchanged alarmed glances at this statement. How could Noah possibly know what the bear was thinking? Yet the boy's certainty was unshakable. Marcus made a split-second decision that would later be scrutinized by every wildlife expert and ethics board in the country. "Open the side door," he instructed one of the graduate students. But nobody moves except Noah and Olivia. Any sudden activity could startle Willow. The door swung open slowly. Noah, with his mother's help, stood from his wheelchair. His leg braces gleamed in the afternoon sun as he took one tentative step forward, then another. Olivia stayed right behind him, ready to sweep him to safety at the first sign of danger, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. Willow remained perfectly still, watching the small human who had once been part of her family. As Noah took his third step, a miraculous thing happened. His legs, which typically required significant support for even short distances, seemed to find new strength. His movements became more fluid, more natural, as if his body remembered a way of moving it had learned long before medical interventions and physical therapy. "His muscle activation patterns are changing," Dr. Winters remarked in awe, watching the monitors. "It's as if his body is accessing a motor memory we didn't know existed." Noah stopped 3 feet from Willow, close enough to feel her breath, to smell the wild scent of her fur. For a long moment, human and bear regarded each other in silence, the child who had defied medical science and the animal who had defied her own nature. Then Noah spoke, simple words that carried the weight of years. "Thank you for saving me." Willow lowered her massive head until she was eye level with the boy. With infinite gentleness, she extended her snout toward him. Noah, without hesitation or fear, reached out and placed his small hand on the bear's nose. A gesture of connection that bridged species, time, and understanding. The monitors recording Noah's neural activity nearly overloaded with the surge of signals. Inside his brain, dormant pathways awakened, connections strengthened, and patterns shifted. No one could explain the mechanism, but everyone witnessed the result. Noah's legs, always his weakest point despite years of therapy, suddenly supported his weight completely. He stood before the bear without swaying, without trembling, as solid and steady as any healthy child. "Mom!" he called, his voice vibrating with joy. "Look, I'm standing like when I was with Bear Mama." Olivia couldn't speak, her tears flowing freely as she witnessed what could only be described as a miracle. The child who doctors had once told her would never stand unaided was not only standing but doing so with perfect balance and control. Willow made a soft huffing sound, almost like approval. Then, with the deliberate movements of an aging mother, she turned and began to walk toward the forest edge. At the tree line, she paused and looked back, not at Noah, but directly at Olivia. Their eyes met across the clearing, mother to mother, caregiver to caregiver, in a moment of profound understanding. With that final glance, Willow disappeared into the shadows of the forest that had been her home for decades. The connection had been made, the circle completed. She had saved a human child, and in doing so had changed not only his life, but the understanding of what was possible in the natural world. Noah remained standing long after Willow had gone, his face radiant with an inner light that seemed to illuminate him from within. "She said goodbye," he told his mother softly. "She said I don't need her anymore, but she'll always remember me." The team of scientists would spend years analyzing the data collected that day. The university would fund an entire research division dedicated to studying the neurological implications of Noah's case. Medical journals would publish peer-reviewed articles on what became known as the Willow effect, the theory that certain animal interactions could stimulate neural reorganization in previously damaged nervous systems. But for Noah and Olivia, the most profound outcome wasn't scientific at all. 2 days after the forest encounter, Noah took his first fully independent steps at home, walking from his bedroom to the kitchen without braces, without support, without struggle. His doctors were baffled, his therapists amazed. The neural pathways that had begun forming during his time with Willow had been fully reactivated by their reunion, creating a roadmap his brain could now follow. As Noah grew, his connection to the natural world remained his most distinctive quality. He could approach animals that fled from others, could sense changes in weather before meteorologists announced them, could find his way through forests without trails or markers. By the time he was 10, he had become an enthusiastic assistant in Marcus's research, accompanying the now famous biologist on supervised expeditions to study wildlife behavior. Olivia's forest therapy program expanded into a world-renowned rehabilitation center, with patients traveling from around the globe to experience the revolutionary techniques inspired by her son's extraordinary journey. The medical establishment, initially skeptical, eventually embraced what they termed multi-species rehabilitation therapy, incorporating controlled animal interactions into treatment protocols for various neurological conditions. The story of the bear who adopted a paralyzed baby became more than a medical curiosity or a wildlife anomaly. It evolved into a powerful reminder of the interconnectedness of all living beings. Documentaries were filmed, books were written, and Noah himself became an eloquent advocate for both wildlife conservation and disability rights, his very existence a testament to the healing power of unconventional connections. On Noah's 15th birthday, Olivia found him sitting alone on their back porch, staring into the forest edge that bordered their property. She sat beside him, noticing how his once fragile body had grown strong and capable, how the boy doctors had once deemed permanently disabled now moved with the fluid grace of an athlete. "Thinking about her?" Olivia asked gently. Noah nodded. Marcus had confirmed the previous winter that Willow had passed away, found peacefully in her den at an age considered remarkably advanced for her species. The white-patched bear had become something of a legend among local hunters and conservationists, protected by unofficial agreement and remembered as the bear who had raised a human child. "I've been having these dreams," Noah confessed, his voice deeper now but still carrying the same wonder it had when he was 5. "Dreams where I'm small again, lying in a den with her and the cubs. But in the dreams, I can see everything from her perspective, too. How scared she was at first, how confused, how something deeper than instinct told her to protect me." Olivia listened quietly, having learned over the years that her son's connection to Willow transcended ordinary understanding. The neural scans had shown it. The behavioral patterns had confirmed it. Something uniquely powerful had formed between the human child and the mother bear. Something science could measure, but never fully explain. "Do you think," Noah asked hesitantly, "that part of her is still in me somehow? That when she found me, when she raised me, something of her became part of who I am?" Olivia thought about the doctor's explanations, about neural plasticity and developmental imprinting, about microbial transfer and sensory development. She thought about the countless scientific papers that had tried to categorize and quantify what had happened between her son and a wild bear. But she also thought about something simpler, something that preceded science and would outlast all theories: the pure, unconditional love of a mother for a child, regardless of species, regardless of difference, regardless of all logical reasons to turn away. "Yes," she said simply, "I believe that when one being truly loves another, they become part of each other forever. Willow is in the way you move, in the way you sense the world around you, in the strength you found when medicine said you never would." She took her son's hand, marveling at how it had grown from the tiny, motionless fingers of an infant deemed hopeless to the strong, capable hands of a young man with limitless potential. "And she's in the way you love," Olivia added softly. "Without judgment, without hesitation, without boundaries, that's her greatest gift to you." Noah smiled, his eyes reflecting the same deep understanding that had passed between him and Willow in that clearing years ago. "And to you," he reminded his mother, "she taught you to hope again, to believe in possibilities beyond what seemed possible." As twilight settled over the forest, mother and son sat in companionable silence, watching as the first stars appeared overhead. Somewhere in the trees, an owl called softly. Noah closed his eyes, listening to the night sounds with a sensitivity few humans possessed, connecting to the wild in ways that had once saved his life and now defined it. The story of the paralyzed baby and the mother bear would be told for generations, in medical textbooks and wildlife journals, in inspirational speeches and scientific symposiums. But the truest version lived in the remarkable young man who walked where doctors said he never would, who bridged worlds few could navigate, who carried within him the legacy of an extraordinary bond between species. And in the heart of the forest, where a white-patched bear had once made an impossible choice to nurture a human child, wildflowers bloomed each spring over Willow's final resting place, a vibrant reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of healing come from the most unexpected sources, and that love, in its purest form, recognizes no boundaries of species, ability, or understanding. The legacy of Noah and Willow continued to grow in ways no one could have anticipated. By the time Noah entered college at 20, studying a double major in neurobiology and wildlife conservation, their story had inspired changes in medical protocols worldwide. Hospitals began incorporating nature therapy wings where long-term patients, especially children, could interact with specially trained therapy animals and spend time in controlled natural environments. The Willow Protocol, as it became known in medical circles, was particularly revolutionary for patients with spinal cord injuries and congenital mobility disorders. While not every patient experienced the dramatic improvements Noah had, enough showed significant benefits that insurance companies began covering these treatments. The core principle, that diverse sensory input from natural environments could stimulate neuroplasticity in ways sterile medical settings couldn't, had transformed rehabilitation science. Noah himself became both subject and scientist, his unique neural pattern still studied by researchers fascinated by how his brain had reorganized itself during his time with Willow. Advanced imaging showed unusual connectivity between his limbic system, responsible for emotions and instinctive responses, and his motor cortex, connections that neurologists theorized had formed during his critical developmental period with the bear. Your brain essentially created a bypass around your spinal damage, Dr. Winters explained during one of Noah's annual evaluations. Now, the head of neurodevelopmental research at a prestigious medical institute, she had devoted her career to understanding the mechanisms behind his recovery. Instead of sending signals through the damaged pathways, your brain found alternative routes that most human brains wouldn't naturally develop. Because most human babies aren't raised by bears, Noah finished with the wry humor he'd developed about his unique situation. Dr. Winters smiled. Exactly. The constant, varied, tactile stimulation from the bear cubs, the different positions Willow placed you in, even her grooming behaviors, they all contributed to sensory input that activated dormant neural pathways. What fascinated researchers most was that Noah's recovery hadn't plateaued like most neurological patients. Instead, he had continued to gain function throughout childhood and adolescence, eventually developing physical capabilities that surpassed many people without his condition. By 20, he was not only walking independently but hiking, swimming, and even rock climbing, activities that should have been impossible given his initial diagnosis. Beyond his physical abilities, Noah possessed another extraordinary gift that scientists couldn't fully explain, an intuitive understanding of animal behavior that transcended conventional knowledge. He could approach creatures that normally fled from human contact, could interpret subtle animal communications that others missed, could predict wildlife movements with uncanny accuracy. These abilities made him invaluable to conservation efforts and wildlife studies. It's like he speaks their language, Marcus Reed, now in his 70s but still actively involved in research, explained to a documentary crew following Noah's work. Not literally, of course, but he reads signals and responds appropriately in ways that take most researchers decades to learn, if they ever do. The most poignant demonstration of this gift came during Noah's junior year of college, when he joined an international research team studying bear behavior in remote Alaska. The team had been monitoring a female grizzly with 2 cubs, tracking her movements through difficult terrain. One morning, they discovered the mother bear tragically killed by a territorial male, a not uncommon occurrence in bear populations, but one that typically spelled doom for the orphaned cubs. Wildlife protocol dictated minimal intervention, allowing nature to take its course even when that course seemed cruel. But Noah, watching the confused cubs through high-powered binoculars, felt something stir within him. A recognition, a responsibility, a connection to his own story. They won't survive winter without her, he told the research team leader. The male will kill them if they stay in his territory. That's nature, Noah. The older researcher replied gently. We observe, we don't interfere. But Noah couldn't accept this answer. That night, he slipped away from the research camp and tracked the cubs to where they huddled beside their mother's body, whimpering and confused. What he did next would be controversial in wildlife management circles for years to come. He approached the orphaned cubs, moving with the strange mixture of confidence and respect that characterized his interactions with wild animals. The research team, alarmed by his absence, followed his tracking device and arrived to witness an astonishing scene. Noah, sitting calmly near the cubs, not touching them but communicating through soft sounds and body language that mimicked bear communication. The cubs, instead of fleeing or showing aggression, watched him with evident curiosity and gradually moved closer. "He's imprinting them," Marcus whispered in amazement. "Just like Willow imprinted him." Over the next 3 days, Noah guided the cubs away from the territorial male's range and toward an area where the research team knew another female bear had recently lost her single cub to natural causes. Using techniques no conventional wildlife manager would have attempted, he facilitated an introduction between the grieving mother bear and the orphaned cubs. Against all expectations, the female bear eventually accepted the cubs, perhaps driven by her own maternal instincts still active after her loss. The adoption wasn't immediate or without tense moments, but within a week, trail cameras captured images of all 3 bears foraging together, the new family bond growing stronger each day. "It's unprecedented," the research team leader admitted, reviewing the footage. "Cross-fostering happens occasionally in wildlife rehabilitation with very young animals, but for wild bears at this age, with minimal human intervention, it simply doesn't happen." "Unless you speak bear," Marcus said, looking at Noah with pride and wonder. "Unless you were raised by one yourself." When Noah was asked how he had known what to do, his answer was simple. "Willow taught me." Not with words, but with everything she did. She showed me that family isn't always about birth. It's about who protects you, who nurtures you, who shows you how to survive in the world you live in. The Alaska bear adoption made headlines worldwide, adding another chapter to the already remarkable story of the boy raised by a bear. But for Noah, it represented something more personal. A chance to pass forward the gift that Willow had given him, to create for other orphaned creatures the second chance he had received. On his 30th birthday, Noah stood at the edge of the forest where his journey had begun. Beside him stood his mother, Olivia, now director of the internationally renowned Bennett Institute for Natural Rehabilitation. Also present was Dr. Marcus Reed, retired but still sharp-minded, using a cane carved from a branch found near Willow's last den. They had gathered for the dedication of the Willow Bear Sanctuary, a 1,000-acre protected forest where bears could live without fear of hunting or habitat destruction. The sanctuary also included a state-of-the-art rehabilitation center, where human patients with neurological conditions could participate in carefully designed nature immersion programs based on Noah's experience. 30 years ago, Noah addressed the crowd gathered for the dedication. A bear made a choice that defied natural instinct and scientific explanation. She chose to protect a human infant that should have been by all natural law either prey or threat. In doing so, she not only saved my life, but changed our understanding of what's possible, in medicine, in wildlife biology, in the connections between species. He gestured to the forest behind him. This sanctuary exists not just to protect bears like Willow, but to protect the possibility she represented, that sometimes compassion transcends biological boundaries, that sometimes the rigid categories we create between human and animal, between civilized and wild, between broken and whole, need to be reconsidered. Olivia watched her son with tears in her eyes, remembering the helpless infant she had abandoned in despair, the miracle child who had returned to her walking and thriving against all medical predictions. The journey from that desperate day to this triumphant one had been long and often challenging, but it had transformed not just Noah's life, but countless others. As the crowd applauded and the official ribbon was cut, Noah slipped away from the ceremony, walking to a quiet spot deeper in the forest where a simple stone marker stood beneath a towering oak tree. The marker bore no name, just the outline of a bear's paw print with a distinctive marking representing Willow's white chest patch. Noah knelt beside the marker, placing his hand on the cool stone. Though Willow had died years ago, this memorial had been placed near where she had first found him, creating a tangible connection to the beginning of their extraordinary story. "I kept my promise," he said softly to the quiet forest. "I'm protecting your home, your family, your legacy." He paused, feeling the familiar connection that had never faded despite time and distance. "And I'm still walking, still growing stronger, still carrying what you taught me into the world." A gentle breeze stirred the leaves overhead, sending dappled sunlight dancing across the forest floor. In that moment, Noah felt what he had always felt in the wilderness, a sense of belonging, of connection, of being part of something larger than human understanding could fully grasp. The paralyzed baby who had been adopted by a bear had grown into a man who bridged worlds, human and animal, science and nature, limitation and possibility. His story had brought tears to millions, had changed medical practices and wildlife conservation approaches, had inspired a rethinking of what it meant to be family across species boundaries. But perhaps the most profound legacy was the simplest, that sometimes, when all hope seems lost, the most unexpected savior appears. And sometimes the deepest healing comes not from conquering the wilderness, but from allowing ourselves to become part of it, embraced by its rhythms, nurtured by its wisdom, transformed by its wild and wonderful heart. 5 years after the dedication of the Willow Bear Sanctuary, Noah found himself facing a challenge that tested everything he had learned from his extraordinary life journey. A rare neurological condition, possibly a delayed reaction to his early trauma, began to affect his mobility once again. The symptoms appeared gradually: a slight tremor in his left hand, occasional weakness in his legs, moments of unexplained dizziness. Medical tests confirmed what Noah had already sensed. The neural pathways that had miraculously rerouted around his original paralysis were beginning to destabilize. "It's as if your brain is forgetting the alternate routes it created," Dr. Sarah Winters explained, studying his latest brain scans with a furrowed brow. Now, in her 70s, but still actively involved in Noah's care, she had never seen anything like this regression. The pathways are still there physically, but the signals are getting confused, like a traveler losing their map. Noah absorbed this news with characteristic calm. At 35, he had achieved more than anyone with his original diagnosis could have imagined possible. He had hiked mountains, swum in oceans, developed the Bennett method of wildlife-integrated therapy that was being implemented in rehabilitation centers worldwide. He had never taken a single step for granted. "So, I'm going backwards," he said simply, looking at the colorful brain images that showed the gradual dimming of neural activity in key motor areas. Dr. Winters placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "For now, yes, but we know more than we did when you were a baby. There are treatments, therapies, standard medical approaches," Noah finished for her, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "But we both know my situation has never responded to standard approaches." Olivia, now 65, but still formidable in her dedication to her son and their shared work, leaned forward intently. "What are you thinking, Noah?" Noah's blue eyes, which had never lost that peculiar clarity that seemed to see beyond ordinary human perception, fixed on the forest visible through the hospital window. "I need to go back," he said quietly, "not just to the sanctuary, deeper, farther, to where it all began." The plan Noah proposed was radical, even by the standards of his unconventional life. He intended to spend 6 months living semi-wild in the heart of the forest, in the same area where Willow had found him as an infant. Not alone, that would be too dangerous given his deteriorating condition, but with minimal human intervention and maximum exposure to the natural environment that had once rewired his infant nervous system. Medical authorities were skeptical, ethics boards concerned, and even Olivia questioned whether this retreat from modern medical support was wise. But Noah was resolute, convinced that somewhere in the primal experiences of his earliest development lay the key to halting his neurological regression. My brain formed these pathways without medical intervention, he argued during a tense meeting with specialists. It learned to function in response to specific environmental stimuli that can't be replicated in a hospital setting. I need to give it the chance to remember that learning. In the end, a compromise was reached. A research team would establish a minimalist base camp at the edge of the designated wilderness area. Noah would live primarily alone in a simple shelter deeper in the forest, checking in periodically with the base camp via satellite phone. Monitoring equipment would track his vital signs remotely, and emergency extraction protocols were established in case his condition worsened suddenly. The day Noah walked into the forest, still under his own power but with a noticeable limp that grew worse with fatigue, Olivia stood at the tree line, fighting the sense of déjà vu that threatened to overwhelm her. Once before, she had entered these woods with her son, her heart heavy with despair. Now she watched him go with a different kind of heaviness, fear mixed with hope, worry tempered with faith in his extraordinary connection to this wilderness. "I'll be fine, Mom," Noah assured her, his pack containing only the bare essentials for survival. "This forest saved me once. It will remember me." The first month in the wilderness was physically grueling. Noah's symptoms worsened initially, as if his body was rebelling against the harsh conditions and lack of modern comforts. He fell frequently, struggled to gather food, and spent long hours simply resting against tree trunks, conserving his dwindling energy. The research team, monitoring his vitals from the base camp, debated whether to extract him multiple times, but Noah's cognitive functions remained sharp, and he insisted on continuing. Then, gradually, something began to change. It started with his sleep patterns, deeper, more restorative rest that left him with increased energy upon waking. His nervous system, bombarded with the intense sensory input of the wild environment, began to show subtle signs of adaptation. The constant variations in temperature, the uneven forest floor requiring continuous micro-adjustments in balance, the necessity of using his body in ways that modern life rarely demanded, all of these factors began to stimulate neural activity in patterns reminiscent of his childhood recovery. By the 3rd month, Noah was documenting measurable improvements in his motor control. His journal entries, transmitted digitally to the research team, described increasingly complex movements he could accomplish. Climbing specific trees, crossing particular streams, tracking animals through difficult terrain. More intriguingly, he reported heightened sensory awareness, particularly in his ability to detect and interpret animal movements and vocalizations. "It's like learning a forgotten language," he wrote in one entry. "At first, everything sounds like meaningless noise. Then gradually, patterns emerge. Meanings clarify. My brain is remembering not just how to control my body, but how to process information the way I did as a child with Willow, through senses most humans have dulled through disuse." The research team, led by a brilliant young neurologist named Dr. Maya Chen, who had written her dissertation on the Willow effect, began to document what they termed sensory-motor reconnection. the reactivation of neural pathways through intense multisensory stimulation. Noah's brain scans, taken during his periodic check-ins at base camp, showed remarkable changes. Areas that had been going dark were lighting up again, and new connections were forming between previously isolated neural regions. But the most extraordinary development occurred in the 4th month, during an unseasonably cold autumn storm that swept through the forest with unexpected ferocity. Noah, caught farther from his shelter than planned, found himself struggling against hypothermia as temperatures plummeted and freezing rain penetrated his clothing. His legs, affected by the cold and his underlying condition, began to fail him. He fell repeatedly, each time finding it harder to rise. As darkness fell and his situation grew increasingly dire, Noah dragged himself beneath the protective branches of a massive spruce tree, curling into a tight ball to preserve body heat. His satellite phone, damaged in one of his falls, couldn't connect to signal the emergency team. In the gathering darkness, shivering uncontrollably, Noah faced a stark realization: he might not survive the night. It was then that he became aware of movement nearby, heavy, deliberate footfalls approaching his makeshift shelter. Through the curtain of freezing rain, Noah made out a large, dark shape. A bear, not Willow, who had been gone for years, but a younger female with distinctive markings that Noah recognized from his wildlife surveys. The sanctuary staff had named her Aurora for the unusual light-colored streak across her forehead. Aurora was known to be one of Willow's descendants, possibly a granddaughter or great-granddaughter, though exact lineage was difficult to confirm in wild populations. Noah had observed her multiple times during his sanctuary work, noting her unusual tolerance for human presence compared to other bears. Now she stood at the edge of the spruce shelter, water streaming from her thick coat, observing the shivering human with evident curiosity. "Hello, sister," Noah whispered through chattering teeth, using the soft vocalization he had developed for bear encounters. "I don't suppose you've come to help me like your grandmother did." What happened next defied explanation by any conventional wildlife behavior standard. Aurora moved under the spruce boughs and settled her massive body beside Noah, not touching him directly, but close enough that her body heat created a pocket of warmth in the freezing air. She positioned herself between him and the wind, creating a living windbreak that significantly reduced the chill factor reaching his vulnerable human form. Throughout that long, cold night, Aurora remained beside Noah, occasionally shifting position but never leaving. By morning, when the storm had passed and Noah's body temperature had stabilized, the bear simply rose, shook the water from her coat, and ambled away into the forest without looking back. When Noah finally made it back to base camp and recounted this experience, the research team was skeptical. Dr. Chen suggested that hypothermia might have caused hallucinations, that perhaps he had simply found better shelter than he remembered. But the GPS tracker in Noah's equipment confirmed his location during the storm, and later analysis of Aurora's known movements, tracked through a sanctuary monitoring program, placed her in the same vicinity that night. "It's statistically impossible," one wildlife biologist argued. "Bears don't protect humans during storms. They don't share body heat. They don't adopt paralyzed human babies either," Noah interrupted quietly. "But one did, and something of that memory, that connection, persists in this forest, in this bear lineage, not as human sentimentality, but as knowledge passed through generations, knowledge that humans and bears can, under specific circumstances, help rather than harm each other." The encounter with Aurora marked a turning point in Noah's wilderness therapy. Following that night, his neurological improvements accelerated dramatically. MRI scans showed increased activity in his limbic system, the emotional processing center of the brain, which appeared to be facilitating reconnection with motor control areas. Dr. Chen theorized that the emotional resonance of the bear encounter had triggered a flood of neurochemicals that reinforced the neural pathways first established during Noah's infancy with Willow. "Your brain remembers being saved by a bear," she explained, studying the colorful images of Noah's neural activity. "Not in language or conscious thought, but in the deep architecture of your limbic system." Aurora's behavior essentially unlocked that memory at a neurochemical level. By the end of the 6-month wilderness immersion, Noah walked out of the forest with a steady gait, his tremors gone, his movements fluid and controlled once more. The medical community was astounded, and a new phase of research into what was now termed environmental neural recalibration began in earnest. The hypothesis gaining traction was revolutionary, that certain neurological conditions might respond to immersion in the specific environments where the brain had originally learned to function, particularly in cases where early development occurred under unusual circumstances. But Noah understood something beyond what the scientific papers could capture. As he stood at the edge of the forest on his last day, looking back at the wilderness that had twice saved him, he felt a connection that transcended clinical explanation. This forest, these animals, this wild place, they were as much a part of him as his own cells and tissues. The boundary between self and nature, between human and wild, had been permanently blurred in his extraordinary life journey. Back at the sanctuary headquarters, surrounded by the team that had supported his experimental treatment, Noah articulated a vision that would define the next phase of his life's work. "We've been approaching rehabilitation from a fundamentally flawed perspective," he explained, his voice passionate. "We've assumed that human health exists in isolation from the natural world, that our nervous systems are self-contained units that can be fixed with isolated interventions." He gestured to the brain scans displaying his remarkable recovery. "But what if optimal neural function depends on connection to the environments and beings that shaped our evolution? What if certain conditions aren't disorders at all, but rather mismatches between human nervous systems and the artificially sterile environments we've created?" From this insight emerged the Willow Integration Protocol, a revolutionary approach to neurological rehabilitation that combined cutting-edge medical technology with strategic reintegration into natural environments. Specially designed wilderness areas were created where patients could experience graduated exposure to the sensory complexity of nature, while still receiving necessary medical support. Animal interaction programs, carefully structured to ensure both human and animal well-being, became central to treatment rather than peripheral therapy animal visits. Most controversial was the cross-species foster program, where carefully selected conservation professionals with specialized training would temporarily integrate certain patients into wildlife rehabilitation settings. The concept was inspired directly by Noah's experiences, but implemented with rigorous protocols to ensure safety and ethical treatment of both humans and animals. Patients with neurological conditions similar to Noah's original paralysis showed particularly promising responses. As these programs expanded globally over the following decade, Noah continued his personal journey of discovery. At 45, he established the Interspecies Communication Institute, bringing together researchers from fields as diverse as neurology, evolutionary biology, ethology, and indigenous knowledge systems. Their mission was radical yet profound: to explore and document the biological foundations of connection between species, particularly in cases where traditional boundaries between humans and wildlife appeared to dissolve. Noah never married or had children in the conventional sense. When asked about this by journalists or colleagues, he would simply smile and gesture toward the sanctuary where bears descended from Willow's lineage still roamed, where patients found healing in connection with the natural world, where the boundaries between human and wild blurred in ways that changed lives. My family took unusual form from the beginning, he would explain. That pattern has continued throughout my life. My descendants aren't defined by DNA, but by the continuation of this work, this understanding, this recognition that healing often comes from the most unexpected connections. On Noah's 50th birthday, a small gathering assembled at the original site where Willow had found him as an abandoned infant. Olivia, now 80, and using a wheelchair but still sharp-minded and passionate about their shared work, sat beside Marcus Reed's daughter, Catherine, who had followed in her father's footsteps as a wildlife biologist after his passing several years earlier. Dr. Chen, whose research on the Willow effect had revolutionized neurological treatment approaches, stood nearby with her graduate students. Representatives from rehabilitation centers worldwide that had implemented Noah's methods completed the intimate circle. At the center stood Noah himself, still strong and vital, despite the challenges his unique nervous system had faced over the decades. His hair had silvered at the temples, and fine lines marked the corners of his eyes, but his movements remained fluid and graceful, a living testament to the body's remarkable capacity for adaptation and healing when given the right environmental context. 50 years ago, in this very spot, my story should have ended. Noah addressed the gathered group. A paralyzed infant, abandoned by a mother driven to despair by medical pronouncements and societal failures, left to the mercies of the wilderness. By every conventional expectation, I should have died that day. He paused, his gaze traveling to the ancient trees surrounding them, as if acknowledging unseen presences. Instead, my story took an unprecedented turn when a mother bear made a choice that defied every natural instinct and scientific prediction. Willow didn't just save my life. She initiated a journey of healing that has expanded our understanding of what's possible when we transcend the artificial boundaries we've created between human and wild, between damaged and whole, between separate and connected. As if responding to some unheard signal, Aurora emerged from the trees at that moment, her massive form instantly recognizable by the streak of light fur across her forehead. Now, elderly for a bear, she moved with the deliberate pace of an animal secure in her territory, unafraid of the humans gathered in her forest. She paused at the edge of the clearing, dark eyes surveying the group before settling on Noah. The researchers and sanctuary staff froze, following established protocols for bear encounters. But Noah simply smiled and made the soft huffing sound he had developed over decades of communication with these animals. Aurora responded with a similar vocalization, then settled onto her haunches, watching the proceedings with what almost appeared to be interest. For most of human history, Noah continued, acknowledging Aurora's presence with a respectful nod, we understood ourselves as part of nature, not separate from it. Indigenous cultures worldwide recognized the healing potential of connection with other species, with forests, with rivers, with the living systems that sustained us. Modern medicine, for all its remarkable achievements, lost this wisdom when it isolated healing from the environments that shape our biology at the most fundamental level. He gestured to the research team and rehabilitation specialists present. What we've rediscovered through my unusual case is not new knowledge, but ancient understanding supported by modern science. That optimal human neurological function depends on meaningful connection with the natural world. That certain conditions improve not through isolation and sterile intervention, but through strategic reintegration with the sensory complexity and interspecies connections that shaped our evolution. As Noah spoke, a light rain began to fall, droplets catching the afternoon sunlight as they filtered through the canopy. No one moved to seek shelter. There was something appropriate about experiencing this moment fully exposed to the elements, to the sensory richness of the forest that had shaped Noah's extraordinary journey. The work we've done together has helped thousands of patients find new neural pathways, new possibilities, new connections where medical science once saw only limitation and deterioration, Noah continued. But our work has only begun. The implications extend beyond neurological rehabilitation to questions about human development, environmental design, conservation biology, and our fundamental relationship with the more than human world. Aurora rose suddenly, capturing everyone's attention. For a moment, she stood at her full height, 7 feet of wild power and primal grace. Then, with deliberate movements that seemed to echo across generations, she turned and disappeared into the forest, leaving only swaying branches to mark her passage. That, Noah said softly, is the greatest lesson Willow taught me. That healing is not a destination but a continuing journey, not a conquest but a conversation, not a return to some idealized normal, but an ongoing discovery of new possibilities within the beautiful complexity of being alive and connected. As the small group made their way back to the sanctuary headquarters, Olivia rolled her wheelchair beside her son, reaching up to take his hand. She would be proud, she said simply. Willow, she would be proud of who you've become, what you've accomplished. Noah squeezed his mother's hand gently. And of you, he reminded her, the woman who found the courage to return to the forest and reclaim her child, who transformed her greatest despair into life work that has helped countless others. Mother and son continued in companionable silence, each reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had begun with an act of desperation and been transformed by an unexplainable act of cross-species compassion. Behind them, the ancient forest whispered its timeless wisdom, that sometimes the deepest healing emerges from our willingness to be vulnerable, to be held, to be part of something larger than our individual selves. The story of the paralyzed baby and the mother bear continued to ripple outward, touching lives across continents, across disciplines, across the perceived boundaries between human and wild. And in the heart of the sanctuary forest, new cubs were born each spring to bears carrying Willow's lineage, bears who, through some mysterious combination of genetics, learning, and environment, displayed unusual capacity for coexistence with the humans who shared their world. As Noah's 70th birthday approached, the global network of Willow Centers had expanded to include facilities on every continent, each adapting his methodology to local ecosystems and cultural contexts. What had begun as an extraordinary personal journey had evolved into a worldwide movement, reimagining the relationship between human health and the natural world. Noah himself had gradually reduced his public appearances as age brought new challenges to his unique nervous system. His mobility had decreased somewhat, requiring occasional use of a cane crafted from a branch found near Willow's last den. But his mind remained sharp, and his connection to the natural world had only deepened with time. He spent most of his days now in a simple cabin at the heart of the original sanctuary, surrounded by the forest that had twice saved his life. Young researchers and healers from around the world made pilgrimages to learn from him directly, absorbing not just his methodologies but the deeper wisdom that informed them, the lived experience of someone whose very existence challenged conventional boundaries between human and wild. On the morning of his 70th birthday, Noah woke before dawn and made his way slowly to the ridge overlooking the valley where the sanctuary had begun. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, stars fading as the first hint of sunrise touched the distant mountains. He settled on a flat rock warmed by the previous day's sun, his body finding the comfortable alignment that accommodated the old injuries and new challenges of his aging frame. Zrania. As he sat in quiet meditation, Movement in the valley below caught his attention. A mother bear, not Aurora, who had passed several years earlier, but one of her descendants, emerged from the tree line with two small cubs. The bears moved with unhurried purpose toward the stream that bisected the valley, their forms silhouetted against the brightening sky. Noah watched their progress with a smile, recognizing in the mother bear's movements the same protective awareness, the same nurturing attention that he had experienced as an infant in Willow's care. The cycle continued, generation following generation, the lessons of compassion and connection somehow preserved in this lineage of bears that had begun with an unprecedented choice. As the sun crested the eastern mountains, illuminating the valley in golden light, Noah felt a presence beside him. Not physical, he was alone on the ridge, but a connection that transcended ordinary perception. In that moment of dawnlight clarity, he felt Willow's presence as tangibly as if she sat beside him, her massive form a comforting shadow, her distinct scent carrying on the morning breeze. "We did good work, old friend," Noah murmured, addressing the presence that might have existed only in his perception or memory, yet felt undeniably real. "Your choice changed everything. Not just for me, but for so many. The ripples keep spreading." As the sun rose fully above the mountains, bathing the sanctuary in golden light, Noah felt a profound sense of completion. The journey that had begun in tragedy and desperation, an abandoned, paralyzed infant left to die in the wilderness, had evolved into something no one could have predicted. A life dedicated to healing, to connection, to bridging worlds that most believed could never intersect. That evening, surrounded by close colleagues and friends who had traveled from around the world to celebrate his birthday, Noah shared a vision that had been forming in his mind for some time. "I've been thinking about what comes next," he said, his voice softer than in his younger years but still carrying the authority of lived experience, "about how to ensure that what we've learned continues to evolve and expand after we're gone." He outlined a plan for what he called the Willow Legacy Project, a comprehensive initiative to document, preserve, and advance the understanding of interspecies healing relationships. The project would include a vast digital archive of case studies, a seed bank of funding for unconventional research, and most importantly, a training program for the next generation of boundary walkers, people dedicated to exploring the healing potential at the intersection of human and wild. "What we've discovered is just the beginning," Noah explained, his blue eyes bright with the same visionary focus that had characterized his life's work. "The real frontier isn't technological or pharmaceutical, it's relational. It's understanding how human well-being is inextricably linked to meaningful connection with the more than human world." As the celebration continued around him, Noah slipped away briefly to the cabin's porch, gazing out at the night forest illuminated by a full moon. Dr. Maya Chen, now Director of Neurological Research for the Willow Centers worldwide, joined him in the moonlight. 70 years, she said softly. "Most people with your original diagnosis weren't expected to see their 5th birthday, let alone their 70th. Noah smiled, the moonlight silvering his white hair. "The miracle isn't just longevity," he replied. "It's that my life has had meaning beyond mere survival. That what began as tragedy became a gateway to understanding that has helped thousands of others." Dr. Chen studied him thoughtfully. "You know, we've mapped every neural pathway in your brain, documented every unusual connection, analyzed every unexpected function. We can explain the mechanics of your recovery in scientific terms." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "But we still can't fully explain why Willow made the choice she did that day. What made a wild bear adopt a human infant instead of seeing it as prey or threat? That moment, that choice, remains beyond our scientific understanding. Perhaps that's as it should be, Noah replied, his gaze fixed on the moonlit forest. Some connections transcend our capacity to analyze and categorize. They simply exist as possibilities, as openings between worlds we think of as separate but aren't, not really. He turned to face his colleague, his expression serene, but determined. That's why the work must continue beyond any individual lifetime. Because what I experienced isn't just a fascinating anomaly. It's a glimpse of what's possible when we abandon our preconceptions about separation and limitation. When we recognize that healing often comes from the places and beings we least expect. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the sanctuary had grown quiet, Noah sat alone by the fireplace in his cabin, a journal open on his lap. For decades, he had maintained this private record of his experiences, insights, and questions, a chronicle of an unprecedented life journey that had begun in a bear's den and expanded to transform understanding worldwide. On this milestone birthday, he wrote a simple entry that distilled the wisdom of his 70 years. The paralyzed child adopted by a bear became a man who could walk between worlds, not because of miracle or magic, but because a wild creature made a choice that challenged every boundary we believed fixed and immutable. In that choice lay the seed of all that followed, the recognition that healing emerges not from separation, but from connection, not from control, but from relationship, not from conquering wildness, but from remembering that we are and have always been part of it. As Noah closed his journal and prepared for sleep, outside his cabin window, under the full moon's silver light, a mother bear and her cubs moved silently through the sanctuary forest. The cycle continued, the legacy endured, and the boundary between human and wild remained beautifully, mysteriously permeable in this small corner of the world where a paralyzed baby had once been saved by the most unexpected guardian. And somewhere, in the realm beyond scientific measurement or explanation, the spirit of a white-patched bear named Willow watched over it all, her impossible choice continuing to echo through generations of both bears and humans, a testament to the healing power of connections that transcend every boundary we believe defines us. On the morning of his 85th birthday, Noah woke with a strange certainty that filled his entire being. The feeling wasn't fear, but recognition, a deep knowing that his extraordinary journey was approaching its final chapter. His body, which had defied medical science throughout his life, was finally yielding to time. The neural pathways that had miraculously rerouted around his original paralysis, that had been strengthened through his wilderness immersions, were gradually fading. As he had done every morning for decades, Noah made his way slowly to the porch of his cabin, easing his aging frame into the handcrafted chair overlooking the valley. His movements were deliberate now, each step a conscious effort, but his eyes remained clear and bright, taking in the forest he had loved for a lifetime. Dr. Layla Patel, who had taken over leadership of the Willow Centers after Maya Chen's retirement, had been staying at the sanctuary for the past week, monitoring Noah's declining condition. She joined him on the porch, silently offering a steaming cup of tea before taking the seat beside him. "Today's the day, isn't it?" she asked gently, noticing the unusual calm in his expression. Noah nodded, his weathered face peaceful in the early morning light. "I dreamed of Willow last night," he said simply. Not as a memory, but as if she were calling to me. She was waiting at the ridge where Aurora used to watch the sunrise. Layla studied him carefully, respecting both the scientist and mystic that Noah had always been. Over the decades, she had documented countless cases of patients reporting unusual dreams or sensations before significant neurological transitions. "What do you want to do?" His answer came without hesitation. I want to go to the ridge, one last time." The medical team protested, of course. Noah's condition had deteriorated significantly in recent weeks. His cardiac function was unstable, his mobility severely limited. The trek to the ridge, even with assistance, posed considerable risks. But Noah was resolute, and he had long ago established advanced directives that prioritized quality of experience over prolongation of life. "I've spent my life studying the healing power of connection to the wild," he reminded Layla when she expressed concern. "Let me complete that journey on my terms." Preparations were made with the quiet efficiency that characterized the Willow Center's approach. By mid-morning, a small group had assembled. Layla, 2 wilderness medical specialists, Catherine Reed, Marcus's daughter, now in her 70s, and Thomas Bennett, Noah's grandnephew who had followed in his footsteps as a boundary walker between the scientific and natural worlds. Noah declined the all-terrain wheelchair, choosing instead a walking staff carved from the same tree as his cabin. "I'll make this journey on my own feet," he insisted, "however slowly, however far I get." The journey to the ridge became a moving meditation. Noah paused frequently to rest, but also to simply be present, running his fingers over the rough bark of an ancient oak, listening to the distinctive call of a pileated woodpecker, breathing in the complex scents of the forest floor. Each sensation was savored, acknowledged as a gift, a final communion with the wilderness that had shaped his existence. What should have been a 40-minute walk stretched into hours. The medical team monitored Noah's vitals discreetly, exchanging concerned glances as his heart rate fluctuated and his oxygen levels occasionally dipped. But his determination never wavered, and each time they suggested turning back, his blue eyes, still remarkably clear despite his age, would fix on the distant ridge with unwavering purpose. "He's saying goodbye," Catherine whispered to Layla as they watched Noah run his hand over a patch of moss with the reverence of someone touching a sacred object. "Not just to us, but to all of this, to every living thing that's been part of his journey." By late afternoon, they reached the base of the final slope leading to the ridge. Noah's strength was clearly failing, his breathing labored, his steps increasingly unsteady. The medical team began to insist more firmly that they should return to the sanctuary headquarters. Then something extraordinary happened. Something that the witnesses would later struggle to describe in clinical terms, though they would never forget what they saw. A large bear emerged from the tree line at the top of the ridge. Not a descendant of Willow or Aurora, this bear was unfamiliar to the sanctuary staff. A wild male with distinctive dark markings across his shoulders. By all natural instinct and behavior patterns, such a bear should have retreated upon sensing humans. Instead, he sat at the ridge top, watching the struggling group with evident awareness. Noah stopped, his gaze fixed on the bear. A smile of profound recognition spread across his tired face. "Of course," he whispered, "full circle." Before anyone could stop him, he began to climb the final slope with renewed purpose, moving with a strength that seemed impossible given his condition moments before. The others followed cautiously, the medical team ready to intervene, but something in Noah's transformed movement held them back from interfering. When Noah reached the top of the ridge, the bear rose to its full height, an imposing 7 feet of wild power. For a moment that seemed suspended outside of time, human and bear regarded each other across a small clearing. Then, with deliberate movements that echoed across generations and species, the bear lowered itself and stepped aside, as if inviting Noah to the spot where it had been sitting, the exact place where he had watched so many sunrises throughout his life. Noah crossed the clearing without fear, his steps steadier than they had been in months. He settled onto the sun-warmed stone where the bear had been, his gaze taking in the panoramic view of the valley below. The sanctuary he had built, the forest that had saved him, the legacy he would leave behind. The bear retreated to the edge of the clearing, but didn't leave. Instead, it settled onto its haunches, maintaining a respectful distance while appearing to stand guard. The humans in Noah's party remained at the other side of the clearing, understanding intuitively that they were witnessing something profound and private. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the valley in gold and amber, Noah closed his eyes. His breathing slowed, deepened, found a rhythm that seemed to synchronize with the gentle stirring of leaves in the evening breeze. His hands, which had trembled with age and neurological challenges, grew still as they rested on his knees. Catherine, who had known Noah since her childhood, was the first to notice the change. "He's going," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. The medical team moved forward instinctively, but Layla held up her hand, stopping them. "This is his choice," she said softly. "This is his way." As the last ray of sunlight gilded the eastern ridge, Noah Bennett, the paralyzed baby who had been adopted by a bear, the man who had walked between worlds, the healer who had transformed our understanding of the relationship between humans and the wild, drew his final breath. His expression was one of perfect peace, of completion, of homecoming. At that exact moment, the bear at the edge of the clearing rose and let out a deep, resonant call that echoed across the valley. Not a sound of threat or aggression, but something else entirely. The humans present would later describe it as a sound of acknowledgement, of recognition, of passage marked and honored. Then, with unhurried dignity, the bear turned and disappeared into the gathering twilight, leaving Noah's body bathed in the first silver light of the rising moon. Word of Noah's passing spread quickly throughout the global network of Willow Centers. In the days that followed, thousands traveled to the sanctuary to pay their respects. Researchers whose careers had been inspired by his work, patients whose lives had been transformed by his methods, conservation partners who had helped protect the wilderness he loved so deeply. By Noah's explicit request, his body was not removed from the ridge. Instead, in a ceremony that blended scientific acknowledgement with spiritual reverence, he was returned to the earth in the exact spot where his extraordinary journey had come full circle, where Willow had once found an abandoned infant, and where, 85 years later, another bear had witnessed his final moments. A simple stone marker was placed at the site, bearing no name or dates, only the carved outline of a human hand and a bear's paw print overlapping, a symbol that had become recognized worldwide as representing the Willow legacy, the healing power of connection across boundaries. In the years that followed, the ridge became known as Noah's Point, a place of pilgrimage for those seeking healing, understanding, or simply connection with the remarkable story that had begun with an act of desperation and been transformed by an inexplicable act of cross-species compassion. But the most extraordinary epilogue to Noah's story emerged gradually, documented first by sanctuary rangers and later confirmed by scientific observation. Bears in the region, particularly those descended from Willow's lineage, regularly visited Noah's resting place. They didn't disturb the site or show aggression toward respectful human visitors. They simply came, often at dawn or dusk, to sit quietly for a time before returning to the wild. "We've analyzed every possible explanation," Dr. Thomas Bennett explained to a documentary crew 10 years after his granduncle's passing. "Food sources, territorial markers, environmental factors. Nothing explains this behavior in conventional wildlife terms." The crew filmed as a mother bear and 2 cubs approached the ridge, moving with obvious awareness, but no fear of the humans observing from a respectful distance. The bears settled near Noah's marker for nearly 30 minutes, the cubs playing quietly while their mother sat in apparent contemplation, before all three disappeared back into the forest. What we're witnessing, Thomas continued, is the continuation of something Noah understood before science could explain it, that the boundaries we perceive between species, between wild and human, between separate and connected, are more permeable than we ever imagined. That relationships can form that transcend our categories and definitions. He gestured toward the ridge where his granduncle's remains had returned to the earth. Noah used to say that his greatest healing came not from conquering his condition, but from surrendering to connection, to being held, nurtured, and transformed by relationships that shouldn't have been possible but somehow were. As the documentary aired worldwide, viewers were moved to tears by the final sequence, time-lapse footage showing the changing seasons at Noah's Point, bears visiting in spring with new cubs, in summer to rest in the shade, in autumn as they prepared for winter. The cycle continued, the connection endured, the legacy lived on in both human and bear generations. Olivia Bennett had once abandoned her paralyzed infant in despair, believing death in the wilderness was kinder than a life of suffering. Instead, through an extraordinary chain of events that began with a mother bear's inexplicable choice, that infant had not only survived but thrived, ultimately transforming our understanding of healing, connection, and the profound relationship between human well-being and the natural world. The story of the paralyzed baby and the mother bear had come full circle. It continued to be told around the world, in medical schools and rehabilitation centers, in conservation programs and indigenous knowledge systems, in quiet conversations between those seeking hope in seemingly hopeless situations, and in the heart of the sanctuary forest, where the boundary between human and wild remained beautifully, mysteriously permeable. Bears and humans continued their careful dance of coexistence, connected by a legacy of compassion that had begun decades earlier with one desperate mother, one abandoned child, and one wild creature who had made an impossible choice that changed everything. Some said, in the quiet hours of dawn when the forest stirred with ancient magic, that if you sat very still at Noah's Point, you might feel the presence of both Noah and Willow, not as ghosts or spirits in any conventional sense, but as an enduring reminder that the deepest healing comes from connection, that miracles emerge from compassion, and that sometimes when all hope seems lost, salvation arrives in the form we least expect. The Paralyzed Baby and the Mother Bear, a story that began in tears of despair and ended in tears of wonder, a testament to the extraordinary potential that exists at the intersection of human and wild, of science and mystery, of endings and beginnings that flow together in the great, unending circle of life's most profound healing.